The stressful silence moment. Okay, welcome to the second live show from mWISE. This is the mWISE Cloud Security Podcast team and our guest, Chris Hoff, or Hoff, as he prefers to call himself. Yeah. And Chris has this amazing title, Chief Secure Technology Officer at LastPass.
Yep.
So thank you for being on the show, and thank you for agreeing on short notice.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
So, admittedly, when I've heard this title yesterday, I kind of became obsessed with it. I'm sorry, I get obsessed sometimes. And at this point, I realized that Secure Technology Officer is how every technology officer should be. So tell us a bit of a history, how it happened, what the idea and the whole context.
Yeah, it's okay to be obsessed. I have that following. I'm the Taylor Swift of security, apparently. When I joined LastPass, there was a really interesting opportunity to ultimately end up with two titles: Chief Technology Officer, as it relates to the technology of the firm, establishing practices, SDLC, et cetera, and owning engineering. That's both software development and platform engineering, and build and run the security team. And when I was thinking about, okay, so how do I mix those two things? Do I make some ungodly title like Chief Information Security and Technology Officer, which is just a mouthful? I really thought about outcomes, and the outcomes, much like how you described it, Anton, was every piece of technology that should be developed should be secure by default, by design. And you hear Janice Easterly talking about that all the time, right? So I just somewhat confusingly shortened it to Chief Secure Technology Officer. That's the outcome we want. And so I run engineering and security, and we're embedding security from a cultural perspective into everything we do. And this way I don't have to argue with anybody except myself, and sometimes I win. So I don't let Dev engineering make silly mistakes, security mistakes. I don't let security sort of boss engineering around and get in the way. We try to sort of work to referee that scenario and deliver secure technology.
In any case, it produced this effect in my head that I feel like whenever from today I would meet a CTO, I'd be like, so you build in secure technology. Yeah. Because it feels like every chief technology officer has to build technology stack securely. Yep. And that to me, so that's what caused the obsession.
Are you looking for an upgrade?
I am not looking for an upgrade. I'm not sure I qualify as a C-level. I'm too unserious for that. But then again, kind of
I don't know.
So we want to not talk about your kind of incident experience, but I've heard you rebuilt a lot of infrastructure technology applications after the incident, and in the process you improved security. So can you share, again, these are easy questions, sorry, we'll start with easy questions. Like, can you share how it went and what sort of things you were able to build in? Because it's one thing to read some kind of white paper about built-in is better, bolt-on is worse, but here's the person who built things from scratch with security. So what has improved? Tell us the story.
Not only will I answer your question, I will not use the word zero trust in the entire. Sorry, please. So that should make things easier. All right. So let's go back in time a little bit. So I joined May 19th, 2022. I just left B-Sides, San Francisco, and was at Black Hat. And August 12th, I got a call from one of the two new security guys that I had hired who had just started that week at LastPass. And the reason I say at LastPass is we were still part of our parent company. And the entire reason that myself, my CEO, as the first two hires back in May came on board was to separate the company. What that meant was not just copy and paste everything that existed as a 15-year-old company that was part of a large, it was a product portfolio, it was part of a larger company. But actually, rebuild was never really in the cards. The point was, if you have an opportunity to essentially start from scratch, while simultaneously operating a platform that gets about 9 million connections a month to the front door, serving millions of consumer customers, tens of millions of consumer customers, 100,000 businesses. We also had the opportunity, and the plan was we were going to continue operating for a period of time with the parent company, which was in their on-premises data centers, using and leveraging their infrastructure, their teams, build our teams in parallel, build our next generation plant, and then cut over. That was the plan. So August 12th, 2022, life has a way of getting in the way. Got a call. And the security team at the parent company had identified an issue that turned into the incident, which came in two phases. I discussed this morning in the keynote panel I was on. And that was, we'll call it the recon part of the attack. So neither here nor there about the details of the attack, because you can read all about that. We've been blogging about that for the last 2 years. It accelerated all the plans we already had. So we had to keep everything running. We had to, as part of the incident, we literally destroyed entire environments. The dev environment was not rebuilt in place. It was literally recreated using the same infrastructure, but with new controls on top of it. We put additional controls on top of the parent company's endpoints, reporting to two different security stacks as I do my team. And we've ultimately grown over the last year, 18 months or so, to a team of 60 folks, 60 in the security team, which is quite large for a company our size. We have 9.
But you keep secrets.
What's that? Yeah.
It's kind of like
that's another question, but I'll get into it. So the company has 900 people, and 60 of them in security. About the other 450 I own or engineering. So I own basically, or lead, own is bad. I lead basically almost half the company worth of employees. And so that's important because going back to the title, right? You couldn't just, if I was just a CISO, the ability to ensure that what was being built to in terms of spec, as well as sort of best practices, modern software factory design, modern cloud operating systems and software stacks, telemetry, observability, etc., just wouldn't have been possible. So we converged the teams and we rebuilt everything. So I'll use my CEO's description of what we did. It's not what we did, it's what we didn't do. It's not what we changed, it's what we didn't change. Everything is new. So we essentially in a 12-month period of time built an entire new cloud infrastructure. We stood up an entirely new IDP. It's all new compute desks, Windows and Mac laptops for everybody, all new builds, all new security telemetry, all new security stack.
Oh, you really mean it when you say everything?
Everything is new. We got rid of BYOD, so everything's a managed endpoint, including, now we have 2 phones, right? Corporate phone and this, that, and the other. Everything in the cloud, everything on the endpoints, all of the software factory itself, you name it, it's brand new in the last 12 months.
MFA keys?
MFA YubiKeys, yep, for sure. As we sort of had to deal with transitioning, not only we started with engineering and security, and then IT, and more technically, and ultimately more privileged users first. And we are just this week finishing the rollout of phones, which then will cut over from push notification MFA to YubiKeys that will be used both with the NFC for the phones as well as the USB-C for devices also. So yeah, everything is new. Everything.
So it's almost like retrofitting. Some of the stuff could have been implanted into the new system, but a few things you're describing, it sounds like they're not really implantable. You have to build with them or you won't have them.
Yeah, well, I think we could have done that, but 2 things sort of stuck out here. If we really wanted to make the point that we had done everything we possibly could have done to take what happened in the incident and make sure it couldn't happen again, you could sort of rebuild what you had, but also the majority of that technology, I'll go back to what I said, was based on on-premises data centers. So a lot of stuff wasn't cloud native in the first place.
Yes.
So you couldn't, if you picked up and just sort of, lift and shift it just would not have been performant. So interestingly, when we moved from on-premise data centers into cloud, we actually saw a 40% performance increase with comparable costs at the time. I think the operational model, we had used cloud elements before for backup, so a bunch of cloud storage elements, but everything else was running out of on-premise data centers. So it really made no sense to try to retrofit or rebuild anyway. So we, the board, the SLT, the engineering teams, security teams just doubled down and we recreated everything.
So when a normal kind of like a traditional kind of classic legacy company does like a migration to cloud, there is a tech stack change, and there's a culture change. And I think that I sort of assumed that you were moving from like a cloud native thinking to different, better cloud native, but you're saying that a lot of stuff was built in a more traditional, that I sometimes joke, 1990s way, even though it was done later. So was there a culture change component to this?
Oh, 1,000%.
Because this is what annoys me as a technologist the most. But I also realized it's the most important thing for such things.
Yeah, when we looked at what we were going to do as part of this transformation, I used my rule of 4 C's, right? We were concerned about capacity of people, capability of people, competency, and then the culture. So capacity, do you have enough people? Capability, do they have the right ability, the right talent? And how competent are they in that talent? And then how do we embed this, and how do we culturally shift from what was an operational team that was part of a broader organization that had on-premises and cloud to just cloud native. So we hired a lot of folks that came from cloud native environments, at scale cloud native environments, who helped infect the culture in a good way. They have sort of driven from the top down. I will, however, also say that the engineering team, the DevOps, and the operations teams as a whole were just spectacular to start with, and many of them had already gathered the skill sets over time, based on training that they had done before. So we really didn't have to forklift or reject anybody, which was great. So a lot of that was empowerment from not only the sort of top down, but bottoms up. We met in the middle. The challenge with cloud is that you still have this sort of shared responsibility model, and there's a lot of stuff that you can. The good news is you can turn on a lot of features. The bad news is you can turn on a lot of features, and then you've got to overlay all these other technologies. And while I did say everything was new, we did essentially modernize where we could. The core software platform itself, the backend stuff, we changed the containerization platforms, we simplified that, we streamlined it, much more secure implementation of what we do with Kubernetes. But for the most part, some of that software is still undergoing its own modernization, and the teams now are invested in sort of that refactoring, replatforming function where we take the pieces as we can. Database technology is a great example, and we upgrade that over time as it makes sense, because it's still incredibly performant based on what we do today. But we know it can be better, cheaper, faster, and easier, and more secure to manage. So that's the path we took.
Sure. One quick question before we get too far afield. When the cultural shift was happening along with the technology shift, did you encounter any pushback on either of those fronts?
It's really interesting because that question I'll answer in 2 ways. Number one, we have a very, very large international European team, both in the operations and the engineering piece. And so that team, by virtue of the fact that we've got folks all over the world, much of the security team initially started in the U.S. And so it wasn't pushback, but there was a lot of calibration that needed to happen between, for example, my teams in Hungary or my teams in Portugal, teams in the UK, and teams in the US. Not just to mention the fact that there are 5 to 6 hours time differences and culture. So not cultural from a sort of team mismatch, US versus European, but cultural from the perspective of just expectations of, in Europe, they have privacy requirements we don't have here. They have working requirements to give them different times off, and the holiday schedules are all wacky compared to the U.S. And so for the most part, no, everybody just, the good part about our business is that everybody just throws in. And for a year, the amount of just teamwork, forced teamwork, right?
Sure.
Just probably accelerated what would have taken years to accomplish otherwise. So no, we didn't have what we have are really great, opinionated, thoughtful, curious engineers who now, infected not only with the sort of understanding that as a cybersecurity company, we have to always put security first. We have, as I mentioned this morning, we've got awareness campaigns and the security champion program that we're starting up, but more importantly, we have the Slack channel. And the amount of participation of people asking questions, most security people go like, oh my God, why are you asking that question? It's so simple, it's so obvious. But the fact is, by virtue of people asking that question across the company, marketing, sales, legal, you better, and engineering, and then engineering also helping solution things or coming up and saying, hey, listen, I saw this and it's strange to me. We've actually built a culture out of necessity, but one that is, everything can always be better. But I was actually remarkably just thrilled and so proud of the fact that the teams just gelled so well.
Yeah.
So this is like a bit of a strange question, and I think that it's kind of like, would you recommend this to others? And of course, Seth was elbowing me and saying, not the breach. Yeah, and I get it. Like, would you recommend the rebuild experience? Because we do see, you probably saw the same pattern when you observe the industry. People say, some expert tells people that lift and shift is bad. A certain organization still does that and says, yeah, we know it's bad. We're just going to later grow slowly to be a little bit more cloud native and then a lot more cloud native. But occasionally that never happens.
Yeah.
So in your case, you did this. So would you recommend that experience, the rebuild experience?
That's a fascinating question, Anton. And thanks for the elbowing over there. There's, 15 years ago, I think it was, when the Clouderati showed up, of which I was an honorary member, an instigator, if you will. When we were talking about these very things in the Cloud Security Alliance about the pros and cons and cloud native versus not, there was a very large argument that private clouds and on-premise data centers would go away tomorrow and they would just die and never return. Interestingly enough, cloud was always described as being, a pathway to agility, a pathway to operational excellence, a pathway to security, a pathway to cost savings. And what a lot of people found out is that depending upon your particular scenario, one or all of those things could be false or true. And I think what is interesting about your question is we now see a bunch of companies, large names who pushed very heavily for sort of moving from on-premises to cloud, now either engaging in, because, and I'll tell you why in a second, I think it's my theory, either a hybrid model of cloud and on-premise, depending upon workload and cost, especially with commoditized hardware. And if you look now at some people dipping into AI and the need for GPUs that aren't going to just skyrocket, right? You see these big players buying gazillions of NVIDIA GPUs where I can't do that, and I want to pay the cost in cloud. So it actually may be more cost effective to offload those resources somewhere else. But the other interesting issue is that when people realize that as part of risk arbitrage, you can accept, transfer, ignore, do all these things in terms of risk treatments. The challenge is if you sign on to a single cloud provider, you are putting all your eggs in one basket. Regardless of how many zones, how many regions, if you have a system-wide failure, bad things are going to occur. So many people said, oh, no problem. You know what we'll do? We'll build this abstraction layer, we'll use multi-cloud, and then they try to deploy.
But that's used roughly never these days.
Yeah. Oh my God. I can never find an expert in one of those clouds. Yeah. Finding an expert in all three, impossible. You end up dueling teams. And so I think that is driving from a resilience perspective, not necessarily a cost one, people sort of thinking about cloud versus on-premises. And what that's also meant is, okay, if I can figure out the right location for my workloads, and I can figure out, like I told you, the incremental upgrades of technology as it makes sense, because so many of these, especially in established companies, for brand new companies, maybe it's not that big of a problem. We're a 15-year-old company, right? So I've got a lot of older technology, tech debt, tech rot, like any company our size and our age has, and I have to be very thoughtful about what that means. We've adopted technologies that made sense back then. They may not make a lot of sense now. You're seeing a lot of companies having to re-platform their entire backend. We've got for us, when you say what I recommended to people, I wouldn't recommend the accelerated path we took, but I definitely think, depending upon your architecture as a whole, our platform facilitated our ability to effectively lift and shift with I'll call it the weird and hopefully expected, but rightfully so, unexpected performance benefits we got. So I would recommend it for us, which I did. It worked out, thank goodness. Everybody, depends on what we're talking about technology-wise. I'm sorry for the it depends answer, but it does.
Well, I think that actually flows really well into a follow-up question, which is, what benefits come from doing this change, doing the transformation from before an incident? So instead of you can see what I'm getting at. Should organizations wait until something bad happens? Or
but at leisurely pace, you may have never finished.
Right. Yeah.
So, the opposite argument is true too. If you're not doing it because of an incident, you may be going at 1/10 the speed, and you may never converge. So we're like, okay, you answer. I don't know.
No, you're going down the right path. Look, I think the answer to that question is always hilarious because it ends up talking about doing the basics from a security perspective. Okay, what do I mean by that? Asset inventory, asset discovery, change management, understanding what you have, who owns it, things like what it connects to, data dependencies, what kind of data. I mean, you start peeling the onion on these problems, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about cloud or on premises. The reality is if you're not focused on understanding your environment, my mission to my team is to be the most well understood platform on the planet. We're not yet. We're working on that. We have lots of people that are adopting, for example, from practices Google has established and others. And usually I'm a little salty about the fact that, look, just because somebody wrote an O'Reilly book does not mean, and it worked at Google, doesn't mean it's going to work everywhere else. Like 99.9% of the time it won't.
It's the opposite.
Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, it comes down to basics. And so threat modeling, tabletops, there was a big discussion at the keynote panel I was on this morning, right? Being prepared for things and understanding where you have coverage. I'm really pushing on my security teams to think about, like I did in previous jobs, inculcating language and embedding it in the teams to where decisions are always made around integrated, simple, and rapid threat models. So if we're talking about making changes, whether you're using an agile framework or not, the point is you have to be able to describe in an archivable way how the system will likely react to unintended consequences. And so it doesn't matter whether it's cloud or on premises. I think your point about crisis accelerating things, and certainly did for us, is valid. But from the perspective of what we're trying to build, it's to leverage, and there was a great presentation yesterday from the folks at Citadel. They basically talked about everything as code. Their entire security apparatus is now essentially, a big Google GCP partner. Everything becomes a data construct and an object within a big query database. And you can understand your security, you can test your security, you can validate your security, because everything's just code. And so when you roll code, it's a big data problem. Which obviously...
But this only works if the rest of the stack is modern. If up to a certain layer it's modern and then legacy, then the whole thing goes out of the window.
Interestingly,
and it becomes a sci-fi story.
Interestingly, yes and no. So we have similar challenges there, meaning we have some technology that's still relatively modern, well, or even very modern, cloud-based. The problem is that not everything has the equivalent set of rich APIs. So integration of technology becomes just as much a problem between build and buy. So the interesting thing about whether you're talking about legacy or just cloud native without good APIs is this, and I am in no way incentivized.
Is that a thing, cloud native without a good API? I think it...
it shouldn't be, but at the same point in time, let me refresh what I mean. In many
it's like a
cases,
three-legged chicken.
Modern software has, anything you should be able to do in the GUI, you should be able to do in the API. The challenge is scale. The challenge is ultimately doing it in a secure, authenticated manner. And the second thing is how do I take your format and your data, whether it be JSON or another format that you may like, and be able to integrate it into technology I already have. Because I really don't want to deploy technology and then get hooked on yet another GUI. I really want to build it and integrate it into a platform that lets me write tools on top and not get so hung up. So the interesting thing is, and I'm not incentivized to say this, but it's a wonderful piece of technology, and it should be at some point its own little unicorn. But if you've never heard of Tines,
of course.
Tines is amazing. Tines is a drag and drop fabric that allows you to essentially integrate anything to anything.
I think a Tines crew would send you at least a six-pack after this.
I will say I got a t-shirt.
T-shirt would not quite cut it, guys.
It is. Matt Johansson was just talking about it the other day on his blog/podcast, and that is a point for us where, even though there are things that may not be cloud native or even with the richness of APIs, we're really looking hard at making sure that everything we do is automatable. We're not quite at what Citadel it was talking about yesterday. We will get there. Our point was getting it stable, getting the operational models there. But I do think that at the end of the day, I would not recommend people doing it at the pace we did it.
Yes, I get it. Yeah.
So this is actually a really good, follow on to that. What is a good pace? Because Anton was saying that, you don't want it to take 10 years.
Yeah.
And obviously having to do it in a year is only if you're in crisis.
Yeah.
So given LastPass's size and all the other, uniqueness of the company, what would you say?
What would my roadmap have looked like? Yeah. Probably 3 years. Just to be able to, the security stack, we would have had to have implemented all of the security changes that we did anyway, because we didn't bring anything over from the parent company. We started from scratch. We have had to make very hard prioritization decisions because you simply can't do everything with a small team. And again, the IT team, for example, has to implement across endpoints the security controls and policies. So there's a lot of cooperation there. The business units do want to go faster and faster, right? But I think, that's a really fascinating question. I think if I dip back into time, my original plan was probably going to be a 3-year scale at a reasonable pace. We have about a 10-person AppSec team that takes care of the product platform itself out of that 60. And they were in place. They did come over because they took care of the product security itself. And during the incident, by the way, it's important to note that the platform itself was never involved or exploited as part of the incidents. It was back-end infrastructure, which is all too often the case, right? Just cloud storage or some insecure thing that ultimately wasn't well understood or as secure as it should be. But at that point, I'd say, it's going to be different for every company. Also, how regulated you are, whether you're public or private. So we're a private company. We have a lot of regulatory oversight given sort of the solution we provide, a lot of privacy and compliance-driven stuff. But for the most part, I would say we probably would have taken a slower pace, not a year. And it's been 2 years since the incident, so we would have sort of made a huge push at this point. But we needed to separate, too. That was another big thing, is we had to, I'm not sure if 2 years would have worked, and we would have had to compress the time frame anyway. But we certainly accelerated due to the incident.
I think makes sense. And I think I'm trying to sneak in a question about login and telemetry, because you sort of mentioned the point about trying to build the most transparent, most observable stack. Yeah. And you also mentioned times in probably not in this context, but can you give us a kind of a quick view of that part of the kind of DNR / observability / however you want to define it? Like, how do you know everything that's going on? This is super interesting because most companies have a stack that's grown over the years, and they have to face a lot of like, but it's on a mainframe kind of stories. So like, yeah.
So we did, right? And interestingly enough, I think observability gets confused or conflated with, I just send logs to a bunch of receivers, and then it gets basically they mean a SIM, right? A logging platform.
That's a crime, though, to confuse SIM with observability.
I don't disagree, but we had a platform that was used by developers and engineers and security people, and it was nice because it was used by all three. It rhymed with Splunk, as it often does, and people would use that platform, but it became very cumbersome, very expensive. And that's not Splunk's fault. Like, at the end of the day, your design matters and what you're putting into it. But what it didn't do was allow us to as easily integrate our code base and conjoin the operational elements that an observability platform gives you across not only our platforms, but our front-end CDN WAF provider that also needs to export data, because that's the front door that gets knocked on, right? All of the telemetry from the container and infrastructure, cloud infrastructure pieces, in addition to what comes from the cloud natively, all of our endpoints. And we don't use, so we use Datadog, it's no big secret. At the end of the day, like anyone in their business, they're trying to add features like security, incident response, and other things. But Datadog and the instrumentation that we've been able to plumb into our application, and it's used primarily at this point for our production and our actual product. But being data-driven that way allows the security teams now, especially with the integration we've done with our incident response platforms, to now much more quickly determine whether something is an operational non-security incident based on performance or things you see HTTP error code RAMs, everything from what we do for anti-credential stuffing to botnet detection and we get hammered with things like that, as you can imagine. And so now we have a singular view that goes beyond just looking at logs. We also have a cost-effective view because with that platform, you can log things but not necessarily be charged for them. You can rehydrate them later if you need to. So there's a lot of thought that went into that platform that will be extended, and it can join with a SOAR platform that the security teams use to do a lot of their detection engineering work and creation. But that platform and instrumentation observability as a whole is definitely not just a SIM problem.
Correct, which collects the OS logs, and then suddenly you're back in the 90s, even though you're trying to be in the modern
100%.
era. Yeah, that makes sense. So we have time for one more question, and it's the question that was triggered by the discussion we had yesterday, and it's about, I think whenever somebody says cloud is complex, I am conditioned to say, but my boss, Phil Venables, says that it's simple, and I point at arguments that he makes in the 9 Megatrends blog, and ultimately I was the one who argued with him quite a bit by saying that, no, it's very complex, but his argument why cloud is simple was that compare all IT from data center cooling to every single application, where stuff is undocumented and randomly rusts and needs to be screwdrivered into the rack, and cloud, where everything is documented and abstracted, the cloud is simpler. And I think at this point I'm like, you're right, Phil, you win. That's a good argument. I agree. I believe in that. I would present the same message. This is actually, literally, I was convinced by that. And at the same time, cloud's complex story comes up. And then when I brought this up, so you said it's simplex, at which point I was like, enlightened, as they say in Zen stories, right? But it's both complex and simple. So explain this whole thing to us.
Yeah, simplicity. When I started my journey from a security perspective and talking about how virtualization prior to hyperscale public-based clouds, there was a talk I gave at Black Hat, God knows how many decades ago, called The Four Horsemen of the Security Virtualization Apocalypse. And it was really talking about how, and I think it's a fitting analogy, if you map the skill sets needed, and we're going to focus on the human part of simple versus complex, because I don't disagree with Phil. If you get rid of all the moving parts, that's somebody else's problem. Rusting machines, dying machines, and self-healing fabrics, etc. Yeah, fantastic. That complexity is still there. It's just managed by somebody else. So in and of itself, if we're talking about sort of the user experience of somebody riding on top of the cloud, it's technically more simple. However, if you apply the skill sets necessary, and by the way, using the word cloud to represent all public-based clouds is also criminal because
of SaaS.
Like we said, besides just SaaS, the skill sets necessary to operate effectively and efficiently something on GCP versus AWS versus Azure, there are underlying constructs that are very similar, but the expertise needed to operate those platforms and do so in a manner where if you want the resilience we talked about before, I'm sorry, but again, if you're happy to settle with a single cloud provider, then simplicity has a expressed risk that essentially you are accepting the resilience you get. So if that's simple to you and your business model, okay, Phil wins again. I wish Phil.
But he never said multi-cloud is simple.
Well, but the problem is, I see. So that's going to bring more out of this. Oh, Phil. All right, so fair play. But I do think that's part of the challenge is that at the end of the day, in the journey to virtualization, the things that we were used to doing in physical networking, and again, for the most part, if you look at sort of where we're focused, whether you look at the security hamster sine wave of pain or Sunil use the cyber defense matrix, right? You've got network, app, information, user, and device. It's both what you protect and where you implement policies across identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, and kind of look at the intersection of those domains and figure out that at the end of the day, the things that we would do in the physical world may have been, given the way in which we did them, actually easier to implement and more simple given how we implemented them. Network tasks, capabilities within the networking fabric or not. But as the security sort of spread out, or if you look at the security hamster sine wave of pain, it transitions between investing in the network. Oh no, wait, now we got to do the application. Oh wait, that's hard. Now we got to do the information. Oh, that's hard. Then the user. Oh wait, then the device. The reality is you got to do all of it. At the end of the day, that's not simple. Those domains in and of themselves are highly highly complex in their own right. So I think Phil's right by saying at the end of the day, with abstraction in cloud with a capital C, you have on a single cloud provider, you have a known quantity of abstract capabilities.
Yes.
And as long as you as a human being have the understanding of those capabilities, then yes, it's less to manage, quote unquote, and more
Yes.
simple.
Yep.
I think that's half the story. I also don't work for a cloud provider, so I don't have to agree with
That's
Phil.
a fair argument because this is the that comes out. Yeah.
Again, he's not right and he's not wrong, right? At the end of the day, that's why I use complexity. I've used that for the last 15 years. I look at cloud computing and what it means and what it will mean over time as we sort of figure out this transition into whatever the hybrid model looks like, multi-cloud, on-premises, a combination of all of them. The automation and especially what is brewing with AI to help us get rid of some of the complexity that will essentially make it more and more difficult for us to tie together those domains. I still think it's a winning bet, right? I mean, obviously, so are the cloud providers. But oftentimes, the underlying capabilities, whether you're talking about Google, Microsoft, AWS, it's an incredible set of technology that facilitates that simplicity.
Yes.
But, those teams of those cloud providers operate and deal with problems at scale that 99% of us will never do. It doesn't matter whether you're Netflix or not, right? At the end of the day, it's pretty profound and pretty amazing that we get a simple set of abstraction that allows us to pretty much do anything we want. I agree, that's simple. Making a decision on how you balance your risks appetite against one or multiple providers or on-premises off and new technology and disruption, that's the hard part. So,
yes, I buy that. I think that I would try to, I think the word is stuck with me now. So you may see Simplex in another context and will credit to the Hoff.
Not good me. I probably stole it from somebody else. At the end of the day, that transition as it has been from mainframes to mini to micro to client server to Web 1.0 to Web 2.0 to cloud, it just keeps going round and round. We will continue to see cycles of technology compression, time frame compression, innovation, disruption. At the end of the day, from a security perspective, I do think that the complexity in the current world of things comes from a skill gap and and a generational difference in people not understanding or not quite making the turn from people my age. If you haven't educated yourself and you've been stuck in sort of either the endpoint world, the hardware, the laptops, desktops, servers, or the non-virtualized world, and you go to cloud, it's completely alien. And you can't, there's things you simply still can't do, and that's fine. But I do think I both simultaneously agree and disagree with.
I mean, cloud is complex if you don't understand it. That line is very clear and very so. Thank you very much for being on the show. This was a lot of fun and ultimately kind of thought-provoking. Some stuff is stuck in my head now again, so I may have to invite you back so that you explain that part. But again, thank you for being here.
No worries and thanks. It's been 15 years since I've seen you in person. And by the way, we are sitting in the same room, just for those of you wondering.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
I will end on a joke, which you may or may not remember. We were at dinner at some event at some point, and we asked we were talking about something, and said, how much does that cost? And at the time, you were an analyst, and so I basically said, probably 15 Shavakins. And that became a measure of currency that I have used these days, to this day. So
I have to look at it on Twitter. Twitter search isn't that great, but I remember that being spreading on Twitter in the... Was it like early 2010s or late 2000s? I don't know. At this point, I'm like,
I don't remember.
Can I please unhear
I'm
it?
old. What do I care?
The secret origin of the Chuvakins.
The Chuvakins, yes. It's a currency, a measurement of anything you want it to be.
Thank you for reminding me. And again, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. And this is where I do the manual turn off the button.
And
so don't close the browser.
Okay.
Yet, you still close it.
Okay.
This is